All right, now, everybody. Quiet, listen to me. We're going to start a show. Now, some of you people have been with me before. You know it's going to be a tough grind, but we're going to have a show.
And hello, all. What an episode we have planned for you. Thank you. There is nothing like a smattering of Thursday applause, especially if it's recorded. And I must tell you, we are excited today to pursue something that we occasionally speak of on this show. We are not conspiracy theorists, but we do entertain the notion that this past presidential election might not have totally been on the level. I get it. America nobody loves my Lord and Savior, Donald Trump, more than I do. But I'm just saying America has embraced Trump, but there may be more of an embracing than it would seem statistically feasible. And so when it comes to statistics, we have a statistical expert in, and he has brought charts, which I will tell you I've reviewed, and they bring me back to 8th grade algebra and just how intimidating it all was. But he will walk us through the legitimate questions that emerge out of the election and whether it was actually viable, what we saw. And it's fascinating to see a couple of things that he focuses on in specific counties. You know, Donald Trump ran the table in swing states, which in itself seemed extraordinary, you know. Now, it may legitimately be a run of the table, but it also legitimately may be something worth questioning. So, Election Truth Alliance is the name of NathanTaylor's group, and they are, it would seem, and I'll have him describe more of their effort, but it would seem as though they put together the particulars, they put together the X's and O's, the numbers, and they have aggressively sought information and then looked at all of this in a way that reflects the reality of what happened on election night and in the following hours. So we'll talk to Nathan. He will visit. He has his own YouTube channel, and we'll link to it and all this stuff, and we'll certainly try to give him some oxygen in the ways that we do. But I think you'll find it really intriguing. We'll do that bottom of this hour. And, of course, top of the next hour, David Katz, the brilliant legal analyst. He will join us. He is, I think, without peer when it comes to breaking down the law and breaking down legal issues across the English-speaking world. He is one of the great legal minds who offers breakdowns of everything that's going on, constitutionality, civil lawsuits, etc. So we'll get into all of that. There's a lot going on here. I just do want to remind you that Kim is here, and I don't have any drops today. I've got none.
What?
This is all part of the wonderful rewiring of this studio that has happened. So everything is awful right now for me.
They do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell they do it for.
So my darling Albert has to do everything. But I spend time before the show reading and looking at stuff and trying to get video clips, as we all do, trying to just get content for the show. And the thing I hate is having to worry about tech stuff. Just hate it. And now, have to deal with a whole tech meltdown is like just brutal. But it's being handled later today. So hopefully we'll have it for tomorrow.
Get nothing.
Exactly.
And I blame you.
I blame you is gone. I do not have any of those.
Oh, no.
I know, but it frees up my hands. I do want to give a special shout out to Albert, who is here and running things today. And our newest crew member is Matt. And Matt has gotten a lot of love in the chat and in emails. I've even gotten emails. Well, please welcome Matt. I mean, every email sort of PS, welcome Matt. So it's a very welcoming community that we have here. And Matt, really excited to have you join us as well. So Matt will be around when Albert can't be here. And Matt's also working on some other projects with us, with merch and some, maybe social media. So we're trying to maximize the asset that Matt is. So Matt, welcome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Happy to be here again.
Yeah, really, really cool. Now I am. Look at this, Kurt saying, I think there's an internal discussion going on in the chat. Musk's Starlink was active in Tulare County. I looked at the data, and there are massive amounts of single votes for Trump, not a single one for VP Harris. Yeah, those bullet ballots, as they called them, is something we talked about here before. The number of votes just for president and for nothing else, that's called a bullet ballot, and they do exist. I mean, you get them every election. People come out for presidential elections, as we've spoken of before, in numbers that are quite impressive. Generally, though, they do vote for other things on the ballot. So when you get these bullet ballots, I mean, again, some people just vote for president. There is a boilerplate percentage of people who do show up just for that. But what I think has raised a lot of suspicions is that the number of bullet ballots exceeded the normal number. And so it's thought that might be a way that things were manipulated. It's time to start blaming Matt for things. Jim Shields. Yeah, Matt, we do like to blame. Look, everything that happens on this show, we need to blame someone for. Okay, it's America. This is what we do. We blame. Trump blames Biden for everything bad. He's still blaming Biden for everything bad. I blame Albert, then I blame Kim, and now I have Matt to blame as well. Especially if it's just my fault and no one else's fault. That's when I really seek out.
You land the blame hard.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, welcome. What I don't have for you is any kind of pacers and sweepers today, do I, Albert? I don't have any of those either. Yeah, everything's just shut down. So
right, I'll have to write her on that.
Yeah, if you can. Trump says we won't need any votes. I have all the votes because he knows Elon rigged it. I mean, and again, I'm not sure that happened, but I sure will take a meeting on it. I am not convinced that this guy won in the way in which we saw him win, with that kind of dominance of the electoral college and the swing states particularly. He ran the table in the swing states, really? Maybe. Sci-Fi Moby says, I agree with you on the bullet ballots, Mark. Yes, let me just have a cup of coffee and we'll get started. That's Coachella Valley coffee and it's so good. I'm sending some Coachella Valley coffee to David K. Johnston, the Pulitzer Prize winner. Yeah. I always like to say that Pulitzer Prize. That's what I would do if I had a Pulitzer. I'd say, hi, Mark Thompson, I'm a Pulitzer Prize winner. The bullet ballot statistical anomaly is off the charts. No way it just happened, says Happy Enough. Data scientists like me, I guess Happy Enough is a data scientist. Data scientists like me saw this by Thanksgiving and predicted fraud of some kind is behind all of this. Now we have evidence. Thank you. But we'll talk more about this. And again, the statistical anomalies will be discussed in greater detail by a statistician, bottom of the hour. Meantime,
The Mark Thompson Show.
Well done, Albert. Well done. There was sad news this morning, and I will just start with the sad news. Sorry to have to just spend a moment, but I'm glad we do spend a moment because I think Gene Hackman was one of the great actors of his time and maybe in the history of motion pictures and television. He was also a stage actor. I mean, he's really one of those actors who could do it all. He could play big, he could play small. I mean, you saw him in French Connection, Mississippi Burning. These are films he's famous for, but he's a two-time Academy Award-winning actor. And he and his wife died. It looks to have been a carbon monoxide accident, is what I'm seeing. I don't know.
So sad.
Yeah, what details.
He and his wife and his dog all found dead in their home in New Mexico.
Yeah.
He was 95 years old. She, I think, in her 60s, 64, and she was a concert pianist.
Wow.
Yeah.
They lived there. He was somewhat reclusive in the last couple of years, I guess. Born in 1930 in San Bernardino. Moved frequently with his family, as is noted here, eventually landing in Danville, Illinois. Father worked as for a newspaper press. As a boy, he found himself going to the movies a lot, escaping into, the darkness of the movie theater. You always hear about that. He idolized stars like Errol Flynn, Edward G. Robinson. Jimmy Cagney was his favorite. And when he was 13, his father left the family. And he said that when he left the family, he waved a hand to his son as he left. He said, quote, "It was so precise. Maybe that's why I became an actor. I doubt I would have become so sensitive to human behavior if that hadn't happened to me as a child," he said.
Oh.
"If I hadn't realized how much one small gesture can mean."
Mhm.
And it's heartbreaking when you hear it. But 3 years later, after a night in jail for stealing candy and soda, he enlisted in the Marines. He was there until he was 19, and then after his discharge, he bounced around, lived in New York, Florida, and his childhood home of Danville, Illinois, married his girlfriend. They were divorced 30 years later, but that marriage lasted that long. They moved to California, and Hackman joined the famed Pasadena Playhouse. He built a friendship with another aspiring actor who became a good friend of his for a long time. That actor was Dustin Hoffman. Hackman was kicked out of the Playhouse, decided to prove them wrong, headed to New York City, where he was determined to make it as an actor. He landed a small part in a 2-week production of Arthur Miller's play A View from the Bridge. In New York, he kicked around for years, hanging out with Dustin Hoffman and Robert Duvall, who was also a good friend of his. Took small parts as they came. It wasn't until he was in his mid-30s that Gene Hackman finally landed a role that got him noticed, playing Warren Beatty's brother in Bonnie and Clyde. 3 years later, he was nominated for a second Best Supporting Actor role. But he was nominated for an Oscar in that Bonnie and Clyde role. That was in 1968. Then 1970, I Never Sang for My Father was the film that he was nominated for a second time. But he was in The French Connection, 1971, that he solidified his status as a Hollywood leading man, and that did win him the Oscar for Best Actor in 1972. He pursued more diverse roles. They note here in 1972's Poseidon Adventure. Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, that was in 1974. Hackman plays a surveillance expert who thinks a couple is about to be murdered. He also portrayed a hard-charging coach in Hoosiers. That was a brilliant role in 1986.
Really good. Yeah.
He played a warmongering submarine captain in Crimson Tide. That was in the 90s. So
That
you
was
can
good
see
too.
his
Yeah.
dominance in his vitality in these roles through the decades is an extraordinary thing. In
He was a great-
1978, what's that?
He was a great bad guy.
Yeah, he was a great bad guy.
Mhm.
He was a great good guy, great bad guy, great actor.
Yeah, it's
right?
true. It's true.
He played Lex Luthor in 1978's The Superman. He had 80 movies on his resume, and he liked kind of playing silly. He played in The Birdcage in 1996 with Robin Williams and Nathan
that was
Lane.
good. Yeah.
And it was Mississippi Burning, which is a great movie and a great performance. That earned him his 4th Academy Award nomination in 1989. And in Unforgiven, which was the Clint Eastwood film, Western, he got a second Oscar as the loathsome sheriff, real like tough guy, bad guy sheriff, kind of what Kim's talking about. And then he continued with the Royal Tenenbaums. He was brilliant in that, in Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums, as this dying patriarch of a family of kooky geniuses. Angelica Houston was in that. But after a career that spanned cinema's rebirth in the late 1960s, they note, to the new century, Hackman decided he'd done enough. He said in 2004 in an interview that it is over for him. His career, he had no new scripts in front of him, and he confirmed his retirement in 2008. And he said it would take a lot for him to make another film, as he was repeatedly, pounded on by the press, asking him, "Are you sincere about really hanging it up?" And he wrote on a book tour for his novel Escape from Andersonville. He said that he didn't want to keep pressing and risk going out on a sour note. He says, "I feel comfortable with what I've done." And he turned to painting and did voiceover work and wrote books. He wrote an Old West story called Payback at Morning Peak in 2011, a police thriller in 2013 called Pursuit, and he co-authored 3 works of historical fiction with undersea archaeologist Daniel Lenihan. Yeah. He's narrated 2 documentary films, The Unknown Flag Raiser of Iwo Jima and We the Marines, one in 2016, one in 2017. Asked by GQ in 2011 as to how he'd like to be remembered, he said humbly, "As a decent actor, as someone who tried to portray what was given to them in an honest fashion. I don't know beyond that." Gene Hackman passes away, sadly, tragically, with his wife, and it appears it was carbon monoxide poisoning. He was 95.
So I'm reading this article on ABC, and it says that the Santa Fe City Fire Department found no signs of possible carbon monoxide leaks or poisoning. If they said if there was carbon monoxide at the scene, it could have vented out of the home through the open front door before the first responders arrived. But the New Mexico Gas Company also responded, and they also say that as of now, there are no signs or evidence indicating there were any problems associated with the pipes in and around the residence. So this now becomes an investigation, suspicious circumstances, and they're trying to figure it out. They think they were in there for a while.
No, you're right. In the chat, they're agreeing. They're saying just that. Randy says carbon monoxide has been ruled out. Tim is saying it. Randy's saying it. Independent sources are saying it. Law enforcement saying it. They've ruled out. But I will say this. TMZ was reporting it earlier. So it was about an hour ago that I saw it on TMZ. So that's where that came from. And I assume that they sourced that. They didn't just come up with that. And I will say this. The reason carbon monoxide makes sense is that, so you're telling me everything in the house died and there's no signs of struggle or anything like that. So in other words, it seems like as though it would make sense, right? He was found near the front door. She was in a bathroom, says Randy. I don't know. No Way Out with Kevin Costner. That was a brilliant film too. Yeah, thank you, Molly. You're right. He was just great in everything he did. Anyway, I regardless of how they passed away or what the cause was, it's such a tragedy. I guess for me, that carbon monoxide explanation made the most sense for the reasons I've just mentioned, and I just don't know how you otherwise can account for it. Just doesn't, Thanks for that though, and very sad news about such an important actor. My generation's, top of the heap. I would say if there was a Mount Rushmore for actors, for me, Gene Hackman is right there. The French Connection is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, and it holds up, and you should check it out. And I have stories about The French Connection because I went to see a screening of The French Connection at a film festival, and the stories around how they made that movie are extraordinary. Yeah. I think I've told a couple of stories here about it, but they're less about Gene Hackman and more about movie making, so that's why I won't bore you with them now, but maybe another time. Anyway, beloved by many, and certainly everyone who cares about cinema and acting and brilliant performances. Yeah. Popeye Doyle was the character there that Hackman portrayed, and he was completely believable. In fact, his dialogue, some of it at the beginning of the film where you see Popeye Doyle, this New York cop, detective, you see him going into a bar, checking for weapons, you see him chasing down drug dealers, etc. That was all stuff that he was ad-libbing, but he'd gotten it from actual police officers. I mean, he was that sort of actor, researched and brought it to life. So, Gene Hackman passes away at 95. There is, we like to start things a little bit lighter.
Too late for
The
that.
Mark Thompson Show.
Yeah, the new list of billionaires is out, everybody. I know you were waiting for that. You're not going to find anyone on this show on it. But there is always that jockeying for position on the billionaire list. And we know Musk is the richest guy, right? But I was just looking at the list last night. Since it really is a billionaire world now, billionaires populate the new administration in numbers we've never seen before. Billionaires populate America in numbers we've never seen before. And there are a whole bunch of ways in which billionaires are going to enrich themselves with new American policies, which is always very exciting, probably for everybody on this list. But
There's
it made me, what's that?
Apparently there's a new class of billionaire. If you have at least 50 billion, that's the threshold, you're now called a super billionaire.
Ah, a super billionaire is, of course, Jeff Bezos. There you see a picture of him there. And I can't, is that Bernard Arnault? He's the, isn't he the
Is number 3 on the list.
yeah, and he's the like beauty fortune. His fortunes associated with his LVMH
Luxury brands.
Yeah,
like
luxury brands.
Louis
Thank you.
Vuitton.
Yeah, Louis Vuitton, exactly. And there's Steve Ballmer, you see there if you're watching. Ballmer is number 7 on the list, 157.4 billion. Warren Buffett is on the list. He's number 8. And where would you think Zuckerberg is? Who's Zuckerberg, top 5 or not?
It's hard to say because he does have a villain lair, and didn't he build like a super lair in Maui or in Hawaii somewhere?
Oh yeah, no, I think he owns. Ellison owns a whole island. I think Ellison, who's the Oracle.
Ellison owns Kauai, but not Musk. Zuckerberg, didn't he build like a, an underground?
I think you're right. Yeah,
Yeah.
because there was a whole thing with the people who
Yeah.
lived there, and that's exactly right. Zuckerberg is number 5 on the list, by the way, just to let you know, 220.8 billion. So it goes, Musk is number 1, Bezos number 2, Bernard Arnault, as noted, number 3, 238.9 billion. Larry Ellison, we also mentioned, he's number 4, and Zuckerberg rounds out the top 5. Then you get to Sergey Brin, the Google billionaire, Steve Ballmer. These are all super billionaires. Ballmer is Microsoft. And Warren Buffett, as I say, number 8. Number 9 is James Walton from the Walmart fortune, right? 117.5 billion. And then the other member of the Walton family of super billionaires, that's James Walton and Samuel Robeson Walton, 114.4.
They beat even Bill Gates. Bill Gates is 14.
Well, I mean, the Walton fortune, the Walmart fortune is super rich. And so I'm not surprised that they're on a list of super rich people. So, I mean, in fact, there are 4 Waltons on this list. Alice Walton, Samuel, and I saw a couple of others. So anyway, look, it's nice that we're not going to have to worry about them anymore.
They say in the super billionaire class, the top 1% now owns 1/3 of America's wealth.
And that's just a prescription for bad things. You need that wealth to be spread out across a public that is trying to make ends meet. You need a vibrant middle class. I mean, really, this country, from an economic standpoint only, in the 1950s, and early 60s, you really had a vibrant middle class. I mean, you could be a factory worker in Detroit and you could provide for your family in any way you wanted, meaning you could have a fine house, kids who would have access to health care, to education, talking about high-level education, that is to say higher education, college. These things were not out of reach for the middle class. Now they really have become out of reach. I mean, this is a perversion of the ways in which this economy should spread out. Also, the ways in which monies in this economy get into the overall economy, get spent. They talk about the speed with which a lot of these monies get into the economy and make a difference to kind of a robust economy versus an investor's economy. This is a problem as well. In other words, middle-class people spend more, if you just want to think of it that way. Billionaires invest more. So they're making money on their money, but that's not helping America. That doesn't help your country just to have investment where you can say, well, what are you talking about? I mean, these companies need investors to get things going. No, I get it. I'm not saying it's irrelevant. What I'm saying is that a robust economy needs consumer spendings. It needs money in action. And that's not what you have with billionaires. And a billionaire class that gets bigger and bigger and bigger feeds their bottom line because you make money on your money. But these investments aren't really helping day to day to fuel your economy. So when you're looking for, sustaining brick and mortar, when you're looking for sustaining small business, these are all things that are not fed by the billionaire class. And as I've said before, I have nothing against billionaires. We're all trying to get rich. I mean, the race for me is kind of over, but if you are still trying to get rich, go for it. But what I'm trying to say is that the billionaire class as a whole isn't supercharging the economy. They're supercharging their bottom line. So a quick check of what's happening in Washington before I get to NathanTaylor and questions of the election.
The Mark Thompson Show.
I don't know if you saw it yesterday. There was a big cabinet meeting. The cabinet meetings that are covered by the press, always interesting with Donald Trump, because you'll remember from the first Trump administration, there was the moment that every cabinet official at the table had where they had to speak about how grateful they were to Donald Trump for giving them the opportunity to serve in his administration and how extraordinary he is. This was a bit different because you had Elon Musk running the show, sort of, and the press with a gravitational pull toward Elon Musk. And by the way, Musk, who stood for most of the cabinet meeting, apparently, while everybody else was seated, Musk spoke more than anyone else at the cabinet meeting, including Trump. There were a couple of moments, and there was a moment where everybody at the desk, all of his cabinet officials, a room full of people, had to do that thing that they did in the first administration, not this time expressing their faith in their Lord and Savior, but this time it was expressing their faith in Elon Musk, the new kid in town, the real boss, and to applaud as they were asked, do you approve of what Elon Musk is doing? To, by the way, your agencies, everybody at this table, most of them are being gutted by this guy. And because they're all so scared, it's like the Kim Jong-un meetings over there in North Korea. We have the video. Take a look.
The President Trump put out a Truth Social today saying that everybody in the cabinet was happy with you. I just wondered if you had heard otherwise, and if you had heard anything about members of the cabinet who weren't happy with the way things were going, and if so, what are you doing to address those any dissatisfaction?
Hey, Elon, let the cabinet speak just for a second. Anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, we'll throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy? They have a lot of respect for Elon, and that he's doing this, and some disagree a little bit, but I will tell you, for the most part, I think everyone's not only happy, they're thrilled.
Yeah, they're not only happy, they're thrilled. Let me tell
Elon
you
Musk did
what they're
not
all
look
thinking.
happy there, did he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, it's a bit awkward.
It was like the reluctant clap.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple like Rubio clapped once. Rubio, who? How long will Rubio be there? I mean, somebody like Hegseth, they'll hang on to the bitter end. Remember the last Secretary of State in the first administration, the last one, was what's his name from Exxon. Remember, he was the former CEO of Exxon. He came Rex Tillerson, I think was his name, and he was the one who came out of an initial briefing about what was going on internationally, and he called Trump an effing idiot. That got out, got back to Trump, and he wasn't long for the world. So, and by the way, Elon Musk, who's now, again, really running things at government, he is also someone who called Trump an effing idiot. It was about 5 years ago, and in a private conversation, Musk said, after a meeting with Trump, he's an effing it. He's a fucking, what did he say? He's an effing moron, I think, something like that. But it was essentially either literally the same thing or, half a click off of the same thing. Meantime, there is among the new cabinet members, RFK Jr. And RFK Jr. has canceled the vaccine meeting that was going to prepare for this coming winter flu season. They do this in preparation for what will be a flu season that will require a tweaking of the flu vaccine. This is the second federal meeting that he has canceled related to vaccines. He is also, at the same time, being asked about the measles outbreak. There's a measles outbreak in Texas. We mentioned this to you last couple of days.
It seems like a great time to cancel the vaccine talk, Mark.
Well, we're canceling not only the flu vaccine, or at least meetings about synthesizing a new one, but we're canceling our faith in the measles vaccine. And when I say our faith, I mean as a government, the vaccine protocols are laid out. It looks as though RFK Jr., despite the fact that he said he wouldn't touch the vaccine protocols, is doing nothing but touching the vaccine protocols, like everybody else who lied in those cabinet confirmation hearings. So the measles outbreak is serious. One child has died because of this. What are the numbers on everybody? I think I want to say they're in the 50, like 50 something actually have contracted it, something along those lines. It's in the Mennonite community there. And you may say, well, it's not a religious thing. The Mennonites are this kind of offshoot of Christianity. I mean, they're a Christian faith, but there's nothing in their faith about anti-vaxxing or rejecting science from the standpoint of medicine. So it's not related to anything related to their faith. I understand why they mention they're Mennonites, because it's a cloistered community, you could argue. You could say that they're kind of isolated, and that community is making decisions for themselves. And so in that sense, you have a community within Texas that's sort of doing this without a connection to the community around them. That said, they're paying the price. They're paying the price. You're also seeing that this was caused by the MMR vaccine, and that is not true. The MMR vaccine is a live attenuated virus, but measles outbreaks have never started from the measles vaccine. Never.
124 measles cases in West Texas.
It's insanely communicable. I mean, measles is insanely contagious. So, and once you get the measles vaccine, you can't shed the virus. That's not how it works. So you wouldn't be contagious by getting the measles vaccine. But that's one of the conspiracy theories that's out there.
Just to show that vaccines actually work, the county where this happened has one of the highest vaccine exemption rates among school-aged kids in Texas. 14% almost opted out of getting the at least one required dose vaccine last year. So you know, people will say, "Oh, it's because the vaccine is to blame, or this is to blame." No, these people didn't take their vaccine. That's to blame.
And measles is surging, and it causes unnecessary suffering and even death. As we just told you, one person has died, and RFK Jr. is taking a sledgehammer to major vaccine developments, and these anti-vax views that he's implementing and putting in motion at HHS, they will be felt throughout American society. Tomorrow, I'm going to have our resident doctor, our show doctor on. I'm shoehorning him in tomorrow because I think this is an extremely important topic that does bear a visit with him. And the last thing I want to say about RFK Jr. is sort of a lighter, funny thing. Maybe you'll find it funny. He has said he will not go after McDonald's in his jihad against bad food and the kind of lifestyle of America. He says, I won't go after the bosses, McDonald's and Diet Coke. And of course, you know, Donald Trump has special buttons in the Oval Office that will bring him a Diet Coke. You know, he hits the button, somebody brings him a Diet Coke.
I need a button like that for wine.
Okay.
Beep.
I need a button like that for my edibles. Bring me my edibles.
There you go.
Where are my weed smokers at?
Thank you. Yeah, there you go. Anyway, that's RFK Jr. He's committed to cleaning up America, but he's not going to clean up McDonald's, and he's not going to clean up Diet Coke, et cetera. And what he will go do is focus on vaccine protocols. So that is that. A sweeper, Albert, and then we'll get to our guest, Nathan.
Sorry, I'm scrolling through
Now
it.
you see why I don't have my machines today. So this is what we have to put up with, but it's not a big deal. I'm Mark Thompson Show. Thank you. That was not worth waiting for, but thank you. If you haven't yet, smash the like button. We've given you a bit of an overview. Sadly, we leave some stuff on the table, but it's good to get everybody at least an idea of what's happening. The Hackman thing is big, and it took a little time for us to give you a retrospective of some of what he's done in his life. But trust we're watching everything else. Here's 5 toward your billion, says Citizen Morgan. Thank you for that. Very special. I also noticed that somebody pointed out a Hackman performance that I did not mention, and it was Joe. Thank you, Joe Grayson. Don't forget Hackman and Young Frankenstein as the only the blind man. Yeah. So there's actually an interesting story. It's not a long story. It's a quick story behind that. Hackman wanted to be in Young Frankenstein and wanted to work with Mel Brooks. And he spoke to Gene Wilder, as I recall, about being in this film. And Wilder spoke to Brooks. And Hackman made it clear, I don't care if it's a tiny role, like just even a quick role, one scene. I just would love to work with you guys. I think it would be a great thing to have done in my career. So Brooks and Hackman and Wilder look at the script and there's nowhere to go. And then Mel Brooks says to Gene Wilder, what if we gave him this role of the blind man that befriends Frankenstein and the monster? And they did. And of course, it's not a small role. It's a terrific role. And it is one of the cornerstones of the movie. And Hackman is brilliant in it. So it went from like a simple ask and a small role to a huge role. And so that's the story of a Young Frankenstein. A great call on that, Joe. I had forgotten about Young Frankenstein. So, all right. Without any further delay, although we do love delaying on this show, let me bring in this guy from the Election Truth Alliance. I've seen a bunch of his stuff, and it tracks. what he says makes a lot of sense, but I think he can walk us through some of the statistics pertaining to the last election. There's certainly questions. I'm not saying that it wasn't legitimate. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, as you know, but I'll definitely take a meeting on the legitimacy of those final vote tallies, particularly when you talk about Donald Trump running the table in the swing states. How about it from Election Truth Alliance, NathanTaylor, everybody. Hi, Nathan.
Hello. Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course.
I'll give a
Yeah.
brief background. Sorry. So
Yeah.
for those of you who aren't familiar, my name is Nathan. I'm one of the co-founders. So there was 3 that helped co-found the Election Truth Alliance, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And we care about investigating the election, making sure our elections are fair and free and secure. So it's not about, challenging, it's about verifying. So that's very important. This isn't, as you would say, right, this isn't election denial. This is election security. This is insurance. This is, making sure everything is above board, and you do audits. Everyone does audits. So why don't we audit our election?
Bravo. I mean, I think that's exactly right. So tell me give us an overview of what you found or what you surmise based on statistics that you've looked at and the early returns on the numbers. That's why I say statistics. And then, then walk us through specifics. Go ahead.
Yeah, I believe we have a PowerPoint as well. So my background specifically for what I do, civilian side, I'm in cybersecurity, data analysis, and military side, I was a 25 Bravo computer tech specialist in the Army Reserves. Got my degree in network information and security systems, and then commissioned as a signal officer. So radio communications, all the good stuff, satellite. I work in the ETA, and we have some very accredited, very, I would say smarter than me people that all they do is statistics. All they do is simulations. So one of our co-founders, Jive, was one of the ones that kind of dug deeper into our concerns in Clark County, Nevada, and then that blew up to the election as a whole. And so he was actually the one that looked at Clark County and found potential statistical manipulation, and that's where we came up with the Russian tail analysis, which I'll show you. So, all right.
So we just had Nathan knows his stuff. Says I24. Thank you for the.
I appreciate
chat.
that.
Please listen. So we will listen. So Nathan,
questions. I love questions. So just stop me at any time for you, Mark, or anyone in the chat who's got really good questions. Now's the time to kind of ask these, because I don't have. I put out videos and then I'm jumping back into the data. I'm jumping back into trying to get us a paper audit. Any of these swing states, any of these states. That's my big push. If you live in any of the swing states, I need you guys reaching out to your local and state election officials and say, hey, let's do an audit. Let's verify. So that should be a part of our process.
We just had Clark County up there on the screen. Put it back up, and this is part of your PowerPoint, Nathan. Walk us through, and let's.
And I see someone asked, why aren't we doing audits? Why isn't that built in? Generally, it was up until this last election. This election and the one before it, there are certain requirements for a threshold and an automatic recount or an automatic audit. And so in all 7 swing states this time around, and this is why people say this election was over quick. In 2020, there were multiple recounts because of the margins. There were multiple contests. And so there were additional efforts to do audits and compare the paper trail. This time around, every swing state, all 7 swing states outside of the margin of a automatic recount. And so it was over pretty quick. Pennsylvania and I think North Carolina were the ones that had to kind of catch up. And you'll notice that when you go back.
Yeah, and this is really important what Nathan is saying. There's a threshold which would trigger an audit. And it's interesting that in none of these swing states was that threshold reached. That's not like just a footnote. That is part of the story. Now, go ahead. How about Clark County?
Yep. So this is Nevada. They have 2 population centers that are a majority of their vote. And that's Clark County, bottom right, the really dark area, and then Washoe County, top left. So these are 2 very important places because these are also your Democrat or your liberal strongholds in the state. And so the reason why we highlight this place is because Clark County put out their cast vote record. It's the digital representation of their votes and how people voted. Clark County specifically, and this might be a little busted on these slides, don't worry about it. So the reason why is their quality in Clark County is really good. They go down to the machine and the type of voting. So we can actually find the ID number on the machine associated with the vote and early voting, election day, and mail-in. And so that's huge for being able to kind of look at the data and do an analysis. So let's pull back up here. Mail-in
let's
voting.
try to go through these in the order sort of that they were. I know.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
So mail-in voting, there's only 6 tabulators in Clark County, so you can't get a good distribution doing it this way. But what we wanted to kind of highlight is it's not showing any strange correlation when we do some statistical analysis. And Washoe County looks about the same. So for a baseline, you're seeing the Democrats are really leading in mail-in. And that's, people are expected to see that. There's a strong, argument that mail-in is pro-Democrat. They like to vote by mail. So if you go to the next slide, when we were looking at the data, one of the analysis we do specifically is this. This is a binomial distribution. This is a statistical term. Some of you know it as a bell curve. It's just the concept of if you have certain types of data and it's a coin toss in the sense that it's either you got a yes or a no. And in the case of what we're doing, we're arguing that when a voter goes and votes, no matter how they vote, what you should see is they either vote for a candidate or they don't. And so if you pull out Harris or you pull out Trump's distribution, it should be binomial in nature because they either voted for Harris or they voted for something else or they didn't vote. And so what we were seeing in the distribution, we mapped it for multiple vote types and multiple places. So not just Clark County, but we're using Clark County as our baseline to kind of explain why it's concerning and what our analysis potentially shows, and then we'll extrapolate from there. So this is election day 2020. This is early voting. And so let me go back and go to election day real quick. And let's highlight.
There you go. Yeah.
The top is just the overlay of both. And what you'll notice is election day almost matches a normal distribution, a bell curve. There's only one little split here at around 50%. Maybe that's an anomaly, maybe that isn't. But if we're looking for this is what you would more expect to see is a normal distribution, binomial. And so this is early voting. Clark County, Nevada has polling locations around the county. They do it a few days, so you can just go in and you don't vote by precinct here. You vote by location, and then it gets correlated because there's an associated number. So you have like a voting ID number that you can potentially use. And so what we found here is when we mapped this distribution, we see it doesn't match a binomial expected distribution whatsoever. And this was concerning. We're like, what would cause this? And as we kind of go back and forth, I've talked to a lot of statisticians that have done election integrity. And the answer I always get is, oh, well, you can't say this is weird. Okay. Well, what can I say? Well, I can say that when we compare this to every other type of voting, both mail-in and election day, this is the anomaly. This looks weird compared to every other.
For those, Nathan, a lot of people just listen to the show and don't see it. And I'm wondering if we can just give a big podcast audience that just hears the audio. So I just want to describe this bell curve that you're talking about.
Yes. So the way these graphs work and the way you read them is at the bottom of the axis, it's the percent of vote. So we have 2 graphs here. One is for Harris and one is for Trump. And so what we're seeing is the bottom axis, it's 0 up to 100% of the vote. And so what we see is as you grow from 0 up to 20, up to 40, you get a slight curve of the graph growing as a kind of a mountain. And then when you get after around 45%, it actually drops off. And then when you hit 60, it grows and spikes up again. So instead of it being a nice, smooth mountain bell curve, we see this tail for both candidates, and it's just inverted and they're mirroring. Mirroring is expected. That's the whole point, is when we have a 2-party system like we do in the US, you should expect to see one candidate gets 40%, one candidate gets 60%. So it'll mirror.
In this case, what you're describing, and you can see this, the bottom graph, that tailing is this spike from Trump votes. Is that right?
Yes. And what's concerning here is when you're winning, the further right, the more percentage, the more votes you get. So if there was manipulation and this distribution shows concerns of manipulation or some anomaly, it would show in this case that Trump is benefiting from that anomaly, or whatever's happening is impacting Harris's vote. Either way. Now, if we go to the next slide, let me bring up my slide as a representation. If you go one more over, this is actually a down ballot race for early voting. This is the Supreme Court, I believe the state Supreme Court chair races. So they have a bunch. We pulled the C race and the F race. And what we'll find is these also match a binomial distribution. What is important here, the reason why this is a big deal is because this is the same ticket as early voting.
I love
so
that.
You're telling, and so the presidential race, we're seeing concerns of manipulation. We also did the Senate race. Guess what we're seeing for the Senate race?
I'm guessing you're seeing a normal binomial.
I'm not. We're finding the same tail in Senate. So president and Senate both exhibit the same tail, but every other down ballot race we've looked at, go to the next slide, please.
Got it, Albert?
This is the questions. They have ballot questions. There's 7 in total. We pulled out these 2. More binomial-like distribution. These aren't perfect, but they do match a more expected binomial distribution.
And the binomial thing is just normal bell curve. In other words, that's what it looks like.
And so for those who are kind of listening, we looked at early voting, and I'm saying the presidential and Senate race both have a weird distribution where there's a spike and it's missing a portion of a bell curve. But then every other race, when we look at the Supreme Court state of Nevada seats, when we look at the ballot questions, they show a bell curve. They show a normal distribution. So now we get into kind of what is this and what does it mean? And this is where we're kind of saying, hey, we've seen this before. As I mentioned, one of the co-founders of the Election Truth Alliance, Jive, he has ridiculous background as statistician. He's done work for some companies, financial companies and everything. So he knows his numbers. And he found this. He said, hey, I've seen this shape before. I've seen this tail before. 2020 Russian constitutional referendum. This gave Putin additional terms in office where he could extend. Same concern of that distribution not being binomial, having a tail. Go to the next slide. Comparison. Early voting, presidential, Russian tail. So this is where we're highlighting. This is the same potential weirdness in the data, the voting distribution. And so what would cause this? Well, this is where I would argue. Go to the next slide. One more thing. That was the Georgian Dream Party. So this is in Georgia, the country of Georgia. Same concerns on when you map the data in a expected distribution, looking at party. Same concerns of potential manipulation. This party is accused of being supported or in support of Russia as well. Interesting. Now, here's the fun part. Go to the next slide.
Just to put a sharp edge on it, the statistical anomalies, the tail, the Russian tail, as you say, it is present in all of these different places that you're pointing to.
Yes, different countries, races, and elections.
Exactly. But I mean, there is a weird congruence between the countries it's showing up in, essentially Georgia and Russia, and now America this last go round. Now, please continue.
Yes. And then now we're going to talk about what would cause this in theory and potential. And so one theory we've tested time and time again, and we have yet to concretely disprove it, is this could be a potential algorithm changing and or deleting votes. So we set out to test this in a statistical analysis to see if we could see it. Clark County, Nevada, as I said, has data down to the lowest level, the tabulation machine. And in that case, that is as clear data as you need to see if there's any potential manipulation going on. And so we set out to test this. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see one representation of doing that. This is a statistical analysis, same data. This is Clark County. And we're doing it by binning the vote percentages as more votes were cast across multiple machines. Early voting specifically has thousands of machines represented, so we can do this analysis because there are some machines that only got 50 votes cast on them. There's some machines that got over 1,000 up to, I think, 1,250 or so, 1,300 votes. So because we have such a range of data, we can map out how both parties are performing as more votes were cast in different areas. It's not as people voted, but it was as places had more people vote, how did both parties perform? And so the way you read this is at the bottom, it's in bins, meaning it's in groups of 50, I believe. So 0 to over 1,000 different amounts of votes cast. And then the y-axis, the left axis of the graph is the percentage of both parties getting. So blue is Harris and red is Trump. And for those of you who can't see this, it's just a bunch of bars of varying sizes. And so So what do we see here, Mark? What are your thoughts immediately?
So you're seeing then a candidate in Trump that is beginning to overperform. Is that what I'm getting? Maybe I'm reading this wrong.
No, exactly. So what we notice is from 0 to about 200, 250 votes across multiple machines, both candidates have a different output. Harris is slightly leading after a little bit. I think we lost the graph. And then what is noticeable is after 250 votes across all of these machines, we begin to see this separation. And so when we'll pull this back up here, you'll see, oh, we lost 2 slides.
Can you go back to where we were, please, Albert? Yeah, thank you.
And they all build up on this. What we notice is after in the machines, in the voting locations, in places where more votes were cast, we start to see the amount of votes for Trump increase until about 60%, and it averages out. We start to see Harris lose votes or drop down in votes and not get as much of a percentage. This is concerning. This is specifically concerning because to see this across multiple machines, and it's not just like one place is a spike, one place is different. This is across all the machines in Clark County for early voting.
So again, this is fascinating. So everything's running, it would seem, as per usual through about 60%, you're saying, and then past that, that's when Trump starts to overperform.
So what I'm saying this means, and what we need to validate, and what paper ballots and an audit will show or not show, is there an algorithm that has a threshold of about 200 to 300 votes occurring in Clark County and potentially other places, and we have data for that as well. After that threshold, it begins to change votes from one candidate to the other. And then here's where we get into the math. In order to keep one candidate at 60%, if more votes were cast and you've flipped enough, you start deleting extra votes. And so you're sitting at 60%, you're deleting extra votes to keep that margin. Because if you kept flipping votes, it would just keep going up until you hit 100. So you keep it at 60. And so we were like, okay, so this is kind of what was really concerning, is we can see that happen. If we go one slide over, we'll break down quickly into looking at the distributions and then where else. So election day, right? We're not seeing it here. Next slide, normal distribution. This is Washoe County. We didn't see a lot, but we looked at 2020 and we're like, hey, 2020 for election day is kind of weird for Washoe County. We're seeing that separation that we're seeing for early voting, but in election day here. What's telling is these have different thresholds. These are much lower. These are 140 at most per machine. So if you were to set a threshold based on location and population, it would vary. So Clark County, Nevada. Actually, let's go one more slide back. Let me make this point very briefly. And so if we go back one slide to election day, right, we said, hey, the distribution looks expected, looks normal. Look at how many votes were cast across all of these machines. We're only seeing about 100 at most for 2020, and we're only seeing about 130 to 140 for 24 in election day in Clark County. What's concerning is, as I said, when we looked at Washoe County, we were seeing separation as well in 2020. Now, what's telling is because they have more tabulators in election day and more people voted and spread their vote out, they could have stayed under the threshold for making changes and changing votes. So remember,
repeat that concept for me. More tabulators. Explain what that is. Okay, go ahead.
So here's what's confusing about the terminology is they're technically voting machines, and then the voting machine data is then taken and put into a tabulator. And so it's the tabulators we're worried about because that's where you would bring all the votes to. But what this data shows is this data shows all the voting locations, all the voting machines where people went cast their votes for election day, and then the other ones show early voting and mail-in. And so what we're concerned about is if you had a threshold and an algorithm that starts changing votes, this would make sense that you're seeing a normal distribution for election day because you're not hitting that threshold because there's more machines and people voted more equally across those machines. Early voting, you see thousands of votes per machine, past potential threshold. Okay, well, so let's see if we can find it. So if you go 2 slides forward, we're going to pull up early voting again. And here's that distribution overlaid in a different way, both 2020 and 2024. And so people have called this the alligator mouth or whatever you want to call it. It's just another way of representing both parties and how their votes are cast, or how many votes they get as more votes were cast on these machines. In 2020, we see a more normal distribution for both candidates up until about 400 to 500 votes cast across the machines. Then we start to see that separation there in 2020 for early voting. And about 500, 550 is really where it starts to become apparent. And it's not as tight or as clear as what we're seeing in 24. So this is interesting. This would potentially mean, if there was an algorithm running on these machines, we're seeing it in 2020 too. Interesting.
That is fascinating, I think. By the way, just as a point, right. I mean, you know, we keep talking about 2024, but the reality is what happened in 2020 can be instructive as well. Go ahead.
Well, you say that, and there are some interesting quotes when you look at 2020, specifically about we have to get rid of mail-in ballots, because once you have mail-in ballots, you have crooked elections, as per
Donald Trump said that. Yeah,
that was the Iowa caucus in January. He also, talked about just doing same day voting, and mail-in ballots are fraudulent. And so what's interesting is, as I said, we're only seeing significant manipulation in early voting here. And then in 2020, we were seeing it in election day, but we weren't really seeing it for mail-in. And I find that very interesting with the amount of mail-in votes that were cast in the last election because of COVID. I think it was somewhere around, last numbers was somewhere around 69%. I think 46 was on average across multiple states. Some states had up to 70% mail-in for the Democrats. And so Pennsylvania, which was heavily blue in 2020, that was like 76% mail-in ballots, and Biden won that state. So it's very interesting.
So let me just again step out of the movie for a second to say, if you're then looking at the potential manipulation, the algorithm that is then shifting votes, what Nathan essentially is saying is, and I'm just repeating it just to underscore it, is that the manipulation occurs with the voting tabulation, but not with the voting tabulation of mail-in votes. So the mail-in votes that were dominant in 2020, and as Nathan just noted, carried the state of Pennsylvania for Biden, they weren't messed with, if you want to think of it that way, and you can look at the results and see that. But the potential, anyway, of an algorithm that shifts votes, that's working with all the other votes that are not mail-in. That's essentially what you're saying, correct?
Right.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yep. And that's the concern, is if this was occurring, where is it occurring? So I think if we look at a few other slides here, and we'll just kind of briefly buzz through, that was the big points. If you go to another slide, I believe this is your Senate race. Same concern of manipulation. So as we talked about before, Russian tail in the Senate race for Clark County, Nevada in early voting. This is just another way of representing that. And so if you go one more slide or two more slides, this is where we look at the demographic. And this is where it gets concerning, because if all else fails and you don't trust the statistics, you don't trust the math. We mapped early voting locations in Las Vegas, in Clark County. And so when you actually go and look at the registered parties in this area, Las Vegas is blue. It's absolutely blue. It's ridiculously blue. And we have people who live there who are telling us, hey, it's nothing but blue. And so we're seeing in these early voting locations where more votes were cast, the Republican parties actually start to exceed the amount of Democrat votes cast there. And so, as I said, we're seeing places where there are over 5,000 to 8,000 leading votes for the Republican Party in the middle of Las Vegas. Right. And that just seems a little ridiculous. And it would correlate the concept of, if you had a vote changing algorithm that starts taking and deleting votes after a certain threshold, it doesn't care about the demographics of the people there. It just cares about changing votes. So any thoughts on this?
That's extraordinary. I mean, these are the sorts of anomalies that get eyebrows raised, but I feel as though you've come with some of the math as to how it might be done, particularly when you look at the disparity between the voting machines and the mail-in. I feel that's really compelling just on its face. Well,
and I have more, and I'll run through the last ones here. If you go to the next slide, when we talked about if this was occurring, what are some symptoms, right? If you were changing votes or deleting votes across not just Clark County, Nevada, but all 7 swing states and other states as well, if the vote tabulation machines are compromised, where could it have occurred? And what are some signs of it occurring? And so this is where you've probably heard of drop off. Are you familiar?
That's like the bullet ballots. Is that what you mean? Or
yes and no. So Stephen Spoonamore kind of coined the term a bullet ballot in the beginning because we couldn't pull the data out. And so what he saw, and he was right, and what got misinterpreted is he was talking about, hey, Trump is exceeding over his next down ballot candidate by a lot. And he was worried that those were fake votes or synthetic votes getting fed in. Well, what we're seeing now is when we look at the actual data and we look at both parties and compare, we're seeing drop-off abnormalities from the presidential race to the Senate race to a lower race. And what that means is, let's say, the president gets 50 votes and the Senate gets 75 votes. That's strange because why is the senator overperforming the president? And if we see that consistently across multiple counties and multiple states, it raises eyebrows, as you said, right? And so what we're worried is a significant manipulation where votes were changed from the presidential race from one party to the other would cause a noticeable drop-off anomaly across the state, across multiple counties. And so we're like, all right, if there was a vote-changing algorithm, and if it was just changing votes or deleting votes from the presidential race and maybe left the Senate race alone in some places, do we see drop-off anomalies across multiple states? So if you go to the next slide, we're going to talk about drop-off anomalies real quick. Here's your quick graph. Here's your analysis. Smart Elections, another nonprofit election integrity organization that's been doing this for a long time. Lulu, she's amazing. I've talked to her. I've worked with her a few times, and we still are talking and exchanging information and trying to figure out what's going on. But this is their work. They published this graph, and what it shows is the swing states, 7 swing states. It looks at how many votes did the president get compared to the next down ballot race, which is the Senate. So 0% is the senator's performance. So when you look at this graph, you see that the Democratic presidential candidate, on average, across the 7 swing states, was negative 1.48%. On the other hand, the Republican candidate was positive 5.58%. That means they got over 5% more votes on average than their Senate candidate of the same party. What's strange is when we look at non-swing states and we average it out, we see both of them sit closer to 1 to 2% positive. So why is the Democratic presidential candidate underperforming in the swing states? Right?
Yeah,
that's concerning.
This is the whole game to me.
This is the whole game.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. If you're going to win an election, you target the swing states. Those are what will, flip one way or the other. And what's very concerning is we looked at Wisconsin, Arizona, North Carolina, and we're seeing that significant drop off for one candidate, and then one other candidate is overperforming by a ridiculous amount. So we broke this down a little more for you. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see we graphed it. And Smart Elections has done the same thing. We've done the same thing. And here's Ohio, 24, president to Senate, both parties. 0% is the Senate votes for both parties. So if you're above the line, you got more votes. If you're below the line, you got less votes. In every county in Ohio, in 24, the Democrats got less votes than their next down ballot race, the Senate, and the Republicans at the presidential level got more votes. When we look at 2016, you see what we argue is a more expected pattern of some change between county to county. These are swing states. That's the whole point, is they have populations that are heavily left, heavily right. And so
you'd expect sort of an interspersed kind
yes.
of above the line, below the line. Is that so? If you're just looking at it that way, you can just see top to bottom how there's no intersperse on the top.
Yes,
graph.
and drop off isn't a great analysis in the terms of it's not going to tell you anything. But when you map it out and you look at how consistent it is, when we look at 24, we argue this is a non-human consistency in voting pattern. 2016 looks more human because those populations change and they don't all stay in line. So that's the thing, is drop off alone can't really show anything. But if there was a vote changing algorithm, then drop off would be a symptom if there was vote changes occurring and causing this non-human pattern. So we go to the next slide, and we'll breeze through these last few here.
Yeah, I've got
we see
go ahead.
Two more forward. Arizona, same concerns, little more wishy-washy in 2020, but same concerns in 24. Consistency across counties. Next. Wisconsin, same concerns. There are a couple counties that we see the inverse, and that's one thing we want to jump into is we want to look at these counties where there was a positive drop-off for one candidate or the other and see, what's going on there. But we've done some analysis in some of these places like Dane County, and we have concerns there as well. But on average, you see that more consistent underperformance. 2016, it's a little more back and forth. Next slide. Minnesota. I don't know what to say here. That's pretty obvious.
This is
concerns.
Extraordinary. I mean, if you're not
extraordinary,
but again, if you're just listening, I mean, the difference between 2024 and 2020 in Minnesota is dramatic. I mean, there's just again, if you just look at it sort of as the interspersal of the of drop off, there is none in 2024.
Yeah, it's almost both candidates are generally positive in 2020. And then 24 is just one candidate heavily underperforming, the other candidate heavily overperforming. Here's a key note as well, is when you look at how much one candidate underperforms compared to the other, you'll find that the underperformance is always less than the overperformance. So if there was a vote-changing algorithm and you were changing votes from one candidate to the other, from presidential, this would correlate because you're changing more vote, or you're changing less votes than what was happening. So that would make sense. And so that margin of overperformance is more than what was taken from the other candidate potentially. And so it would fit in, it would support that. I would expect to see maybe 2% overperformance for both parties, depending on, on average. So for one party to overperform by, in this case in Minnesota, I think we're looking at something like on average 10% overperformance for Trump, and something along the lines of, an equal amount of underperformance. This is comparing president to Senate. So, yep. All right.
I wanted to just to take this this question. Dennis says the smoking gun may be at ES&S voting hardware, where two insiders allegedly stole source code, and Tina Peters in Colorado. Can you explain this question and then answer it, please?
Yeah, I can talk about the concerns. One thing we always want to be aware of is because of the last election and the 4 years following, you don't want to directly discredit a company or a vote counting system. Now, I can say there has been multiple concerns from cybersecurity individuals talking about potential compromise of our two main types of tabulation machines.
So give me sadly I've got to wrap up here, but give me 2 minutes to stick the landing on that, because really this gets to how would this possibly have been done.
Yes. So. All right, let's go 6 slides forward for me. We have a graph of 70% of voting equipment is compromised theoretically, and I'll show you those distributions. Keep going. One more, maybe 2 more. Nope, one back. All right, I'll finish on these last 2.
Thank you.
Here's your vote tabulation machines. They cover 70% of the U.S. They cover the swing states. They cover non-swing states. And what's interesting is everywhere we've looked and we've seen concerns of manipulation, these two types of machines are used. And and if you do a little bit of research, you'll find what these two brands are specifically, and you'll find that both have concerns of potential compromise, whether it's having gained access to the image or potential cellular modem access in the machines. It doesn't really matter how you could have done this. It matters that they are there and they are distributed across the U.S., and they would have an impact if there was a vote-changing algorithm and these machines were compromised and that was running. You would have been able to pull off manipulating the election. You would have been able to win the 7 swing states in a straight way, And so what's concerning is you go to the next slide, we look at the change from 2020 to 24. And if these numbers are right, and we'll need to go back and double check and see if there's not been any additional changes, but 88 counties changed from blue to red this election. 0 counties changed from red to blue this election. That is improbable, realistically. Even in other races where someone absolutely swept multiple states, I think it was 1984, Ronald Reagan, he won 49 out of 50 states, and 30 counties were still flipped blue for his opposition party. So for you to flip 0 counties and only get, I think, what was the total count? Somewhere around 30 something states. I'll have to verify, but you were nowhere close to winning at that level, and yet 0 counties flipped. And you only got 49.8% of the popular vote. You're under 50%.
Sure.
It's very suspicious. So.
Yeah, and by the way, when we say suspicious, you're talking about statistically. That's what I like about your analysis. It's statistically suspicious. This isn't a question of, politics. Go ahead.
I think the statistical probability of winning 7 swing states outside of the margin of a recount and with less than 50% of the popular vote is statistically improbable. Like, it would never occur naturally. It would require you to only win in such targeted ways where you get just enough votes in the places that matter. It's a little strange. So, and I'll wrap up with the next. There's 2 more slides, one after this. So skip one, and then I think we'll wrap up, and I'll take just any questions or anything. So this one is, people are like, hey, drop off vote, unpopularity for Harris, right? That's what we're talking about. That's what the argument is people didn't like candidate Harris. They didn't vote for her. Well, when you run the numbers, she actually exceeded Biden's 2020 numbers in Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Georgia. And she got across the 7 swing states, 99.6% of the votes cast. So this doesn't correlate with the amount of drop-off we're seeing in some of these states. It's very concerning. And if you go to the next slide, this is where we talk about big picture. Why does this matter, right? So here's the concern. If there was a vote-changing algorithm running on our tabulation machines, as we suspect, and as the data continues to point to the potential likelihood of it and the means of doing it, it's all been laid out. What's concerning is we did the numbers and saying if 2%, as we saw outside the swing states on average, is what you would expect a presidential candidate to get. So the top right graph here is votes across the 7 swing states right now. I mean, the reported totals. We see Trump is leading in all 7. Harris is closely behind by different values, but underneath. What's concerning is if we were to say a certain threshold because of drop-off was potentially flipped votes, we ran the numbers. We gave a rough estimate. We underestimated as much as we could. It was still looking around 1.5 million potentially flipped votes in just 6 swing states. And when we invert those, we find that Harris wins those 6 swing states if those votes were changed from one candidate to the other. Now, here's 2 final points I want to make. This is not including voter suppression, which Greg Palast has highlighted, and I agree 100% with him. Mail-in voting was heavily suppressed. I still have people telling me and sending me, hey, I went and checked my mail-in and it never got counted. It never got delivered. Here's another concern. When we look at the way the algorithm potentially works, we're looking at votes being deleted as well. And we don't have an accurate or potentially accurate estimate for how many votes could have been manipulated and deleted. So this is not including mail-in suppression. This isn't including people being disenfranchised from their voting rolls. This isn't including all of these other things. This is just if votes were being changed, not deleted, not cast, not thrown out. And so it is a big deal. And I believe I'll wrap up here. And let's go one more slide.
Yeah, I've got only just 30 seconds, right? So quickly, give me the...
Yeah, here's your big picture. Why now, right? Are we going to get audits? Are we going to get recounts? Recounts aren't feasible because of our election laws, but we can have audits. We can have audits in the swing states because if our machines are compromised, the midterms won't be free and fair. The next election, there will be no, we'll get them in the next time. There will be no, hey, 4 years, right? Our democracy requires that our voices are heard. That's built into the Constitution. That's the whole point. And if our voices and our votes are not being counted, we should be upset. We should be looking into this. This is a big deal. So
I love it. I completely agree. And I am very much of the belief that just what you've said on the midterms and on the next general, the methodology by which they potentially manipulated votes is still there. It's proven effective, and they've done it within thresholds so that, you won't get a recount because of those thresholds. And obviously we've got a Democratic Party, it seems, that is sitting on its hands through all of this. Partially, I would say, because it's kind of become a radioactive call to say, I deny the result or I want to recount because of what happened in 2020. So the Democrats don't want to be considered that way. They don't want that kind of stink on them. So they, it makes no sense to me. I mean, it's much too big. The stakes are far too great, but that's where we are. I've got to wrap up, and so we'll have to do Q&A another time. But I do want to mention, can you put Nathan's website up? The Election
go to the
Truth
last
Alliance
slide
website.
there,
Yeah,
and you can see it. So it might not be on the bottom.
Yeah,
electiontruthalliance.org. Super easy to find. We have YouTube as well. And so
electiontruthalliance.org. And great stuff on your YouTube channel as well. So check him out, Election Truth Alliance. And I so appreciate you spending time with us.
Thank you so much.
There's a lot here, and I encourage everybody not only to listen to what Nathan says, but you can go back. Yeah, there it is. We've got it up. You can go back over this video, and you can replay and blow up those graphs even bigger. So,
and as we said, we're pushing for audits. We're pushing for paper trail audits, and so if you can support us in that way, that'd be awesome.
Come visit again, Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. All right, NathanTaylor, everybody. Thank you. Salam, my friend. We have forced one of the great legal minds in the world to wait in our green room, but it was worth waiting for. That was some great stuff. And if you've never been here before, you've cheated yourself out of a real treat. This is one of the great legal minds who offers analysis across the English-speaking world. You've heard him on BBC, on Radio 1 in London. You've seen him and heard him across Fox News Channel, News Nation, across all the television stations in America from coast to coast, and in New Zealand and Australia. And he comes here on Thursdays. How about it for the great David Katz, everyone? Yes.
Hi, great to be with you, Mark, Kim.
Thanks for your patience, David. And it's I'll jump right into things. There is there's kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back with the legal stuff concerning this new administration. They're blocked by one judge on disbursement of funds associated with USAID, and then they're given the green light by another judge or by another judgment. And then the original judge says, no, I need you to disperse those funds the way I told you to disperse those funds. And then I'm in other conversations with people hearing, but it's all going to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's going to decide. Will you just give me the framework that we can put many of these legal judgments in?
Well, I think that the courts have actually done a very good job of standing up for the rule of law and trying to interpret the Constitution and these statutes well. Trump made it as difficult as he could for the courts by this shock and awe campaign. So many things were happening. Now there have been over 80 different lawsuits, I think, just in the federal courts, trying to stop these precipitate actions that Trump and Musk took. And for the most part, the courts, as I say, have ruled against Trump. Trump's been loser, 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 but he's done so many things that, yes, it's easy to focus on the 3 or 4 that haven't gone that badly for the new administration and not focus on the 60 or 70 that have gone poorly. One of the most interesting ones, Mark, is the one that just went up to the Supreme Court, and we talked about it last week. My prediction was that the U.S. Supreme Court would not take the case on the merits. And I still think that the U.S. Supreme Court may not take the case on the merits. But this is the one that involves USAID. And that's the one where a U.S. district judge, the trial court level, said that you have to restore these funds and you have to do it promptly. And the administration didn't do it promptly. So the plaintiffs made another motion, Mark, that said they should be held in contempt, these people in the Trump administration who are not following your order, Judge. And the judge said, well, what have you done to follow my order? What funds have you unfrozen for USAID? And the government lawyer's answer was basically, nothing. The judge wasn't happy to hear nothing, but they had this explanation that they were basically canceling these contracts. They shouldn't have to pay anything on canceled contracts. They were going to delete whole parts of USAID. And basically, they had a whole different story for the judge. But the bottom line was they hadn't done anything to comply with the order. And so the judge says you have to comply by, I think it was last night. And so the Trump administration ran to the U.S. Supreme Court and asked for an emergency administrative stay, saying don't let that judge's order go into effect so that we're basically going to be in contempt at midnight because we still haven't complied with the judge's order. And now here it is. We're going to turn back. Cinderella's about to hit midnight, and it's not going to be good because we're going to be in contempt. Chief Justice Roberts saved them from being in contempt late last night by granting the administrative stay. Now, whether he believes that that's just there's more irreparable harm from having this disaster of having all these people held in contempt, and so what does it matter if it's 2 or 3 more days? But I don't really agree with Chief Justice Roberts for giving them 2 or 3 more days, because I thought the irreparable harm was very clearly on the side of cutting off this money. These people are stranded abroad. Some of them are stranded in place in these third world countries where they've been doing such noble work, helping the local population get medicine, get food. Some of the food is rotting. The medicine is going to waste. The warlords are stealing. If they're talking about saving money, they just frittered away, Musk and Trump, they just frittered away millions and millions of dollars by letting this stuff go to waste. So I thought that Chief Justice Roberts got it wrong. But what he ruled is now the plaintiffs have to reply by Friday to this emergency request of the Trump administration. And hopefully this will be decided Monday or Tuesday, maybe even over the weekend, with, I hope, the entire Supreme Court, or at least 5 of them, saying this is not a case that we need to decide on the merits this quickly. We're going to let the judge's order go into effect, and you guys have to release the money right away. And then, in the course of proper arguments with due deliberation, we'll decide on the legality of it. By the way, they not only have irreparable harm on their side, the plaintiffs against Trump, but I think they have the merits on their side because Congress allocates money. Congress has the power of the purse. And the idea that Trump can just turn off the faucet, that is not our separation of powers. That is not how our government was set up. So so the ruling in the case was you had no right to turn it off. You need to turn it back on. That's what the administration hasn't done. They haven't turned it back on. I'm hoping that with the ruling coming down from the U.S. Supreme Court, I hope this is just a little roadblock, a little bump in the road to getting all of those funds restored. And then the merits can be sorted out, which I think will go the way of USAID. I hope they're back up and functioning, and that'll be the way that it is, because the president, Mark, does not have power to cut off or impound funds that have already been allocated.
Just as an aside, USAID really is the soft power that the U.S. has. To influence communities, to have a presence in communities and in countries all around the world, and to do some real good. I'm not saying every single dollar spent through USAID is a program that you might necessarily agree with, but the truth is, as a whole, it is the way in which you can influence policy and even influence thinking without having to get into a hot war about it.
And Mark, just one thing: there actually does not seem to be on the face of it much fraud, waste, or abuse there. You can imagine in some huge things like the Pentagon and the education department. Sure, there's probably a lot of fraud and waste, very hard to find. If it were easy to find, the inspectors general would have found it. The chance of finding it now are much lower because the administration has gotten rid of the inspectors general.
If you were really serious about weeding out fraud, waste, and abuse, you'd have the inspector generals in place. That's what they're there for.
This is a complete charade. This is a complete charade trying to generate money with chaos for an enormous $1 trillion tax break for the very richest people and the huge corporations. It's obvious. It's patent what they're doing. But there's no reason to think USAID wastes a lot of money. They've admitted that they have to pay, in some instances, money to warlords because they won't let them in to give HIV treatments. They won't let them in to feed people unless, there's the warlord with his hand out. And they document, we had to grease this guy's palm with $20,000. There's no indication that anybody at USAID greased their own palm. So, and of course, on top of that, this is yet another agency that Musk is mad at because they did an investigation of Musk. It's like the Agriculture Department. It's like some of these other departments. And it's a revenge tour by Musk, who, by the way, seems to be, I always call Trump the biggest loser. The lost more money lost more money in business, supposedly, than anyone else with the huge tax write-off that he took because he supposedly lost, whatever it was, $100 billion, some enormous sum that he then carried forward. And so he could not pay taxes year after year. That's why he didn't want to turn over his tax records, among other things. But The crown now belongs, biggest loser, to Elon Musk, who's lost over $100 billion. Mark, $100 billion. You want to get close to a person who's hated by so many people, who repulses so many people like Trump? Guess what? People are going to have that same revulsion toward you. And unfortunately, although you have a beautiful car, toward the Tesla, the stock is tubing. Nobody wants to buy the stock. And Musk has lost over 100 billion. And let me ask you this question. What do we really need to go to Mars for? Why are we paying all of this money for SpaceX? Why? Who wants to go to Mars? Who wants to do this? Why are we subsidizing this? The New York Times did a study of Musk. Musk is the biggest mooch. He's the biggest federal dollar mooch. It's tens of millions. I think it's hundreds of millions, hundreds of billions. You know, the numbers are so big. They have B's in them, all of them. Hundreds of billions of dollars that Musk has gotten from the government. Remember the welfare queen under Reagan? He's the biggest welfare queen of them all, Musk.
That's right. He is. There's no question about that. And there are even more ways in which they're engineering bigger amounts of money, bigger government contracts to Elon Musk, even as he's taking a sledgehammer to government across the board. You've said a lot. I'd love to comment on a couple of things, but what I will say is that USAID is an infinitesimally small amount of money that's spent. If you were to eliminate that entire agency, which is what they want to do, it makes no difference. It wouldn't push the bottom line at all to what they want for their tax cuts. It would be a rounding error. So the reason they're going after USAID, as David Katz has so clearly articulated, is because, and I love that you said it, it's a revenge tour. USAID was going after Musk because he turned off Starlink in the Ukraine-Russia confrontation. It's that simple. He's going after FAA because they were fining him for a bunch of things and violations related to SpaceX. He's going after the IRS and the specific people associated with the IRS lawsuits associated with Elon Musk because of that. The revenge tour moniker that you have offered is perfect for what's happening. If they were really serious about waste and abuse and fraud, you go across the Potomac to the Pentagon. That's where it's happening. And these guys who are so serious about cutting the budget and decapitating government, they've actually given the Pentagon a $100 billion increase in the new budget, the budget that just passed the House. That instead of cutting that Pentagon, that bloated Pentagon budget, they've actually increased it. It's a shame. It's a literal shame. And if these people were capable of shame, they should feel it as a result of this.
And meanwhile, Mark, they are cutting Medicaid. After Trump promised that he wouldn't cut Medicaid, he went around all of those people who get Medicaid or have relatives who get Medicaid who voted for Trump. They were all lied to. It's like, oh, did I lie to you again? Yes, Trump, lied to you again about Medicaid. And of course, you know, Medicaid, I'm not getting all weepy or sentimental about it, but Medicaid helps so many people in desperate straits to get medicine, to get some level of care. And in all of these red states, they're not willing to throw in, even though the feds will throw in 80% of the money, they won't tax themselves in these red states 20% to give Medicaid benefits to the poor. And now the proposal in the new bill in Congress, in the House, that barely passed just the other day, is to cut back the federal contribution. Well, what that means, if the red states wouldn't spend 20% their money to get these benefits to their citizens in the red states, now that the feds are putting in, let's say, not 80%, but 75%, so that the red states will have to throw in 25%. If they wouldn't throw in 20% of the money, they're certainly not going to throw in 25% of the money. And so care for the poor, and these are so many people. You remember reading about how a lot of African Americans ended up voting for Trump? Well, there's more African Americans just statistically in the pool of people who get Medicaid. So again, from one side, the Hispanics, oh, they were breaking for Trump. Well, now their hearts are breaking and their budgets are breaking because a lot of them and their families receive Medicaid. It's just terrible how this demagogue has managed to do this. And this is, of course,
demagogued his way in.
Right-wing demagogues have always done it, hurting the people that they get emotionally involved to support them, and then hurting them terribly economically and in other ways. They're very supporters who got lulled into voting for them.
Randy says Speaker Johnson was saying yesterday that Medicaid cuts are going to come from finding fraud. It's not real cuts, according to Johnson. Well, that's ridiculous. And of course, they're going to say that, just like they're saying now that discharging a bunch of federal workers is because there is a waste to all of these extra people. So then they have to call a bunch back because they're involved with everything from maintaining the national parks to the nuclear arsenal. I mean, these guys will always tell you that it's waste, and they're never going to say, yeah, we have to cut into Medicaid because we're trying to make room for our tax cut. I mean, so of course he says that the cuts come from finding fraud. It's
Mark,
utterly ridiculous.
Mark, it's health care, it's food, it's all the things that poorer people need. You know, Medicaid is for poorer people. Medicare is for older people. The reason they're going after Medicaid is, again, political cowardice, because they dare not go after Medicare. Medicare is the older people, and they vote a lot. Medicaid tends to be poorer people who don't manage to get to the polls in the same percentage. And so they're the, you want to pick on the truly powerless. Start with immigrants, go to probationary employees, go to poor Medicaid recipients. You know,
now let me get you to
the world's richest people, clobbering the world's most unfortunate. It's so revolting.
Yeah, revolting is the right word. I want to ask you, though, about the legality of what they're doing, because the discharge of so many government employees, they're going after these probationary employees, as everybody knows by now, those who they can get rid of, like on a moment's notice, who don't have contracts and unions that would protect them. But there are a number of lawsuits now associated with the discharge en masse of so many of these employees, both the ways they've done it, their ability to do it. And now I want to ask you about the legality of this. How does this all play out legally?
Well, the probationary employees are probably fairly easy to get rid of. Now, the reality is that a lot of the probationary employees are doing a wonderful job, and they have performance evaluations just like everyone else, and they have no marks on their record. They're doing an excellent job. Many of them will sue, but they have lesser due process rights. And so the government, the Trump administration, feels like there'll be easier cases. And
there's not a wrongful termination kind of thing based on the fact that they've had they've had positive reviews, employment reviews.
But it's much more discretionary with the officials getting rid of a probationary employee because they're on probation. There's just a lesser showing that has to be made, and this is all about the aggregate. You know, many of these people will sue to get their jobs back. But, you know, let's say they get rid of 10%, or they get rid of 5 or 6% of the workforce because they gave them that buyout. And the buyout was apparently affirmed by the courts, at least until they cheat them. You know, once they cheat them, they'll go to court and say, hey, you promised me 7 months of pay in exchange for my accepting the buyout. And now you're demanding that I go into office, or you're demanding something else, or you're saying I didn't really qualify. Those people will probably sue. But in the aggregate, Mark, a lot of people don't sue. A lot of people take their lumps. Also, a lot of people are not covered by unions. This idea that everybody in the federal government has a union that protects them. I'll give you one example. Assistant U.S. attorneys don't have a union that protects them. The FBI, I think, has an FBI Agents Association, but I don't think that the FBI is unionized. I could be wrong on that score. Anyway, many people are not unionized. And then you have to go, you know, if you don't have a union, especially to speak up for, you have to hire a lawyer. A lot of people will figure, you know, the economy is pretty good in some places. It's pretty good in California. If you get a notice from them that you're out of your job here and you're a terrific, person, you're in science, you're in any kind of thing that's in demand, who needs to be berated by the federal government and jerked around? Just go to work for a state agency that may even pay more in some of the blue states like California and New York, or just go into private work, which probably pays more. Although the economy in general, Mark, is taking a hit because people are thinking, wow, all these federal employees are losing their jobs, even if they're not sympathetic, because the right wing has made so much propaganda like Fox against federal workers. You think they were all a bunch of bums, when just the opposite is true. There's so many dedicated people in the government. People will see that, unfortunately. They'll learn it the hard way, Mark, when they see all the government services that they rely on and expect to get, and they're going to be diminished or not available. And then people are going to say, oh my God, we really did need all those federal workers. But even if you don't like federal workers as sort of an emotional reaction from watching Fox all those years, you're going to think to yourself, wait a second, my own job may depend on a federal contract. Don't we have half of our business from some federal contract? Because what they've done, Mark, is they've they've invalidated a lot of federal contracts. That's what they did with USAID. They simply said there's 10,000 contracts that we made to go feed these people, to go give preventive medication to those people, to do this other wonderful thing. We're canceling all those contracts. And let me mention one other thing, which sounds like I'm being an alarmist, but I'm not. What they do is they immunize people in the third world, and they go into these disease areas and they abate these diseases. Well, guess what happens? Well, we're going to have another Ebola outbreak. We're going to have bird flu that comes from some third world country that could have been abated by our charitable efforts. A lot of the charity that we do over there, certainly when it comes to medicine and potential epidemics, pandemics, helps us. So God forbid, and then we'll be in the tender hands of RFK Jr. And hopefully he approves the vaccines that we need. I mean, hopefully.
Well, I mean, the reality
someone
is,
just died of measles. Mark, someone just died of measles in our day and age in one of our states, Texas, in Lubbock. One or two people just died of measles, and 18 or 20 are in critical condition. This is something that if you have measles and you're around other kids, 90% of the people around the measles infected person, if they're not immunized, 90% will get measles. And it's terrible things. Not only do people die, Mark, but they lose their hearing later in life. Their sight's worse later in life. They have all kinds of neurological problems later in life. And measles is the easiest shot in the world. And, RFK Jr., I remember Nixon. Nixon at least had a good sense of survival. Nixon would have said to RFK Jr., when that person died of measles, get on national TV and say, you've heard a lot of controversy about me and vaccines. We are right now mobilizing to make sure every kid in Texas and throughout America gets the measles vaccine. Did they do that? No.
well, there is, on that, we talked about it in the first hour, there is no doubt. I mean, it's you've got an entire community. It's an incredibly contagious disease, measles, and as you say, it has all of these awful effects, even if it doesn't kill you. And the reality is that, and it does kill you, as you've evidenced. There have already been deaths just in the last week. But it's odd that this guy RFK Jr. is not only doing that, but I mean the flu vaccine. He's canceled the meetings associated with the typically updated flu vaccine. Forget about development of a COVID pill, which was very much in development, and instead of a vaccine, they were looking at just an easily administered pill that you would take against COVID. That is off the table as well. So he's really taking, an axe in his own way to all of these things at the CDC and at NIH. And then you sort of give me, frankly, almost the literary way in which this darkness comes back to visit us. And that is that because other parts of the world aren't being served by USAID and the inoculation programs there, those diseases reemerge and then come back to this country. And we have a real problem. And sadly, I see that as not just literary. I see that as real life now.
Well, quickly, Mark, I saw on TV, I forget whose show on Legacy Media last night, had this doctor who actually went over there to help these people fight Ebola back when it almost became a pandemic. And Obama, let's give Obama a little bit of credit, right? He took exactly the right actions. We didn't have an Ebola outbreak. I think only one or two people, it could have been awful. Only one or two people, I think, died of it in America. But this poor doctor who'd gone over there, American doctor, he got it. And he survived it. And he's sort of, he's still a doctor. He still works in that field. And that was a point that he made. I mean, we're this close for somebody getting on an airplane, someone who could have been immunized, could have been inoculated by our USAID efforts, getting on a plane, going to the wrong place. And this is not a big joke. We just went through the pandemic. Does anybody remember this? Does anybody remember how terribly Trump handled the pandemic and everything related to it? I mean, we're lucky we got through it with him as president. And somebody said last week, and then I'll stop, they wrote in and they said that I'd lost my objectivity. And I hope I've never lost my objectivity toward analyzing legal issues. But if I lost my objectivity at all talking about RFK Jr., I take a flu shot every year. I don't want my flu shot to be late. I don't want to get the flu. That's not life-threatening. I don't want to get the flu. Millions of people take the flu shot. They don't want to get the flu. They are delaying now the proper mix going into the flu shot, and they're probably delaying the flu shot. And I don't want to get the flu next year. Okay.
Well,
so I'm not. And I certainly don't want to. I don't want to certainly have another bird flu like the last pandemic and be locked down as a practical matter. Although it was a lot of fun doing your show, even during that, Mark.
Well, I mean, I took the flu shot as well, and I encourage everybody to get the flu shot. The flu does kill you. Could very much kill you. I mean, I get that. Probably for most people, it may not have the effect of killing you, but if you're an older person, the flu can be more dangerous than COVID. So I definitely think that this is a contemporary concern. So anyway, that's what's happening.
Mark, I look in the mirror and I still don't think of myself as an older person, but you have a hell of a point there.
I'm being dragged, kicking and screaming to it also. So let me just ask you a question, because it did come up in the chat. If you were to contract some of these illnesses, I kind of know the answer, I think, to this already, but I have to ask you anyway. It was in the chat. Is there any legal action? I mean, could you sue the government for having discontinued the flu virus, for your inability to get whatever might have been an inoculation to prevent you from getting sick?
Probably not, because generally the government bars you from bringing suits like that. You'd have to show some kind of direct harm. Think of a medical malpractice case, which you can bring against the government. You go to a VA hospital and you get malpractice, just like if you went to a non-VA hospital, you'd sue the government, just like you would sue the private hospital if the shoe were on the other foot. And I can imagine some weird, set of facts, but generally speaking, no, it's a public policy, just like those poor Medicaid recipients can't really sue anybody, even though they end up dying for lack of care. I mean, that's what happens with Medicaid, with the people who only get medical treatment on account of Medicaid. They just don't get the procedure. They're just denied the procedure because there's no money for it.
So as we look at what's happening in government, there's an aggressive move to dump government employees, to dump government programs. Long-standing programs are now very much in jeopardy. What is the legal remedy for all of this? I know, I mean, I say all of it. I mean, I understand there's not one legal remedy for everything. But as you look to the law, you're seeing, as you pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, the Trump administration turned back in a lot of these efforts. The Project 2025 people, even as they're executing the dismantling of government at a record pace, there are some legal safeguards, are there not? I mean, as you look at things going down, do you see ways in which the law might actually chasten them or in any way slow them down?
Well, I think the courts have really come to the fore in a very impressive way. And it hasn't mattered whether it's a federal judge who was picked by Trump or one who was picked by Obama. Trump lost 3 lawsuits, either yesterday or the day before. He lost 3 in an hour and a half, all in 3 different courts. And of course, the right-wing media pointed out that those 3 happened to be Obama appointees or Biden, I guess Biden appointees. But there's loads of Trump judges and judges from the both Bushes, that have come to the same conclusion. So I think, generally speaking, the courts are really going to hold on this issue. One of the real nightmare scenarios is that they're going to rule in one of these cases that gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, that there's a unitary executive, to the extent that they would actually wipe out, as a practical matter, things like the EPA, things like the Federal Reserve. I don't think the U.S. Supreme Court is going to go that far. I don't think they're going to say, because this is a precedent from 100 years ago. And a lot of people will say, well, if they overruled Roe v. Wade, this right-wing activist U.S. Supreme Court, they don't care about these old precedents. But I think they do care about these old precedents. And I know that Dobbs and reversing the abortion decision of 50 years had a huge impact on people, had a huge impact on individual young women's lives in particular. But this is a whole different level of impact. The idea that they would wipe out the Federal Reserve, saying that there's no independent agencies, that it's an executive function, and that only the president can control it. So now the president can control interest rates. And the new Democratic president after him could just control interest rates, that they could control the FCC. So the result would be that they would have really low interest rates whenever they wanted to get reelected, and they would torment or get rid of their press opposition the way this guy does in Hungary, by sicking law enforcement on the media to cow the media into being a totally apologist media protecting the incumbent. They're just not going there. The U.S. Supreme Court is not going there. The disruption would be unbelievable. Saying that the president could control interest rates, not the Federal Reserve, would destroy the U.S. stock market. It would destroy people being willing to invest in this country. Getting rid of the EPA. You look at what the EPA is doing right now in California. Who can oppose what they're doing? They're putting all of their effort while there's a Republican president and Republicans are controlling everything, but the EPA is putting a huge effort into helping California. Why? Because we need the EPA to help after the fires. So this is the way the country's always been. There are not 5 votes on the U.S. Supreme Court to get rid of that. It may be that the president can be allowed to get rid of agency heads. So it may be that even if a person has a 5-year term, that they can get rid of them. That's kind of implicated in this another U.S. Supreme Court case, which I think they're not going to take immediately. I think they're going to say that one also is not an emergency, and they're going to allow the reinstatement of that fellow who is the head of the Office of Special Counsel in Washington, who's just the head of a whistleblower thing. He's not another Jack Clark.
Right.
So I know your question was who else is standing up. The Republican senators and Congress members are so unpopular now in their districts. Those weren't just Democratic activists who were yelling at them. That was normal people who were saying, you're going to take away our Medicaid. You're going to mess around with this. The economy's going down. I thought you were going to do something about prices. I just paid over $10 for a dozen eggs. What's wrong with you Republicans? Why are you not doing what you said you were going to do, which was lower prices? Now, Trump and their answer is, well, we're going to do something about the immigrants. Well, let's wait and see, Mark. One of their things is they're going to privatize it. This is going to be another way that Eric Prince is going to try to.
That's
make,
exactly
it's going
right.
to try to. It's going to try to make money. This whole thing was another grift. You think, well, at least this was one thing they were going to do. They were going to deport some of these aliens, whether you agree with it or not. At least this wasn't a grift. This was a policy. They know this too was apparently a grift. They're going to have, private prisons and a private little Air Force, and they're going to pay, some ridiculous price. And hopefully, one of the things wrong with these madcap deportation efforts is that Congress won't pay for them because it's very, very expensive. They've already abandoned the idea in Guantanamo. So it's wonderful that people speak up. I mean, by Rachel Maddow and some of the other people lampooning this idiotic overpriced flights, which didn't even have the worst of the worst. It had people who weren't charged with any criminal offense at all.
Of course. And that's what I said on this show at the time. I said,
Mark.
Yeah.
The publicity. One of the things is not just the courts. It's not just Congress is going to come to their senses because they want self-preservation. What they're weighing is their district hating them because these policies are so loathsome. And they're weighing that against Trump coming into their district with some nobody and saying, okay, I'm throwing my support behind the nobody, not the incumbent Republican. And they're thinking, okay, will Trump coming into my district with the nobody finish me off? Or will these repulsive policies of Trump and Musk that are so unpopular in my own Republican district going to finish me off? And Mark, they're going to make the calculation that they'll take their chance with the nobody. But it's really funny because Trump was on a plane with apparently 3 North Carolina Republican members of Congress. And he saw that Tillis was going to vote against him. Senator Tillis from North Carolina was going to not approve one of these, either Patel, Gabbard, RFK Jr. All 3 made it. But anyway, Tillis had announced that he was going to work against that. He wasn't going to vote against them, but he was already sort of conniving to make sure that guy didn't make it. Trump heard about it. He turned to the 3 Republican congressmen and says, who wants to be the senator? Who wants to be the senator? Meaning they were going to withdraw support from Tillis, even though he's the Republican incumbent senator, and he was going to back one of those Congress members. And Tillis, if Tillis heard about it, the whole idea was for Tillis to hear about it, and he snapped out of it, and Tillis fell right in line as one Republican senator after another has fallen right in line.
Well, that's the reality that he's been able to strong arm all of these senators and Congress people. Yeah, for now, exactly. You said a lot, but I want to just pick up on 2 things we have to wrap up. But the first is what I've said on this show over and over. If you've been a regular viewer or listener, I've talked about privatization of everything. Everything is on the table to be privatized. The U.S. Post Office, I know, has gotten a lot of publicity, but I've mentioned before the private army, the mercenary army of Eric Prince. He has always been in the orbit of Trump. He's been in the orbit to the point that he has been involved in various smaller operations, and he is a government contractor with a rich history with the Bush administration, and he's coming back now in a big way. And the other thing I said is that a lot of those J6ers who were pardoned, I'm talking about the Proud Boys, etc., they are a paramilitary group and a militia, and they eventually will be also deployed to perhaps the border, to perhaps to be helping out with some of these immigration things, these where they get Dr. Phil and local news and they make it look like they're deporting a lot of people. The cruelty and bizarre randomness of it, where they're not actually deporting anybody, as David says, of who's convicted of anything. They're just doing their normal roundups, not even in the numbers that the Biden administration was doing them. And though that militia, that paramilitary group will be part of that as well. But watch for that Eric Prince thing. He's going to make a boatload of money with this essentially privatizing those things that the federal government used to do. And the last thing I want to say, and you can chime in on this too, please. Randy has said, have someone come on and talk about the federal workforce that was reduced during the Clinton administration. That was a much different situation than this. The way that went down in 60 seconds or less was Clinton did promise reform. He did promise slimming down government. But what he did was he impaneled people. I think there were hundreds of people involved at government level having to account for money spent and staffers. And then they went through Congress to decide what areas of government would be slimmed down. This is a cut first and ask questions later crew that's in with Elon Musk. They are just cutting. There is no review as to efficiency at all. There's no review as to fraud and waste. He's making it up if you believe anything he says, from Social Security to any other area of government that he says he's found fraud in, then you're a sap. It is all a lie. Now, please, David.
Well, the thing about Clinton, and you could say that he was too far to the right. I would hope somebody like Clinton. I like my old friend Schiff. I'm not backing Schiff for president, but if you just step back from it and you think, wow, wouldn't he be great? I mean, he's middle of the road. He's trying to actually solve problems. That's what the Democrats ought to be. Problem solvers, not so ideological, not out on the left. And that was Clinton. Clinton was a problem solver. Now you can say, you know what? He shouldn't have gotten rid of welfare as we know it. He shouldn't have done NAFTA. You could see that coming, that they weren't going to live up to the environmental standards and they were going to pay lower wages in Mexico, especially. But Clinton was about doing something. That actually was a program that you could debate and you could say, you know what? He shouldn't have cut the government in those ways, but he did it in an orderly way. And it was designed to actually do something to cut back fraud and abuse. This, Mark, as you just pointed out, is total chaos. Many of those people will get their jobs back. They will lose money on this. And it's a small amount of money. Salaries are a small amount of money. If they cut half of 1% of the government salaries, federal salaries, in a completely chaotic way as they're doing right now, first of all, they won't have real savings because the chaos will cost more than that little bit of savings. But it's such a tiny part of the budget. Clinton balanced the budget. Now we pay this huge amount on the debt because W had these unfunded wars. Everything that Trump is doing is pretty much unfunded. He's trying to do all these cruel things to give that huge tax break out, but it's not going to balance out. We're going to pay even more on our debt. So you got to say that for Clinton, that Clinton balanced the budget. It wasn't, 2 centuries ago. This is our lifetime of most of us. Clinton balanced the budget, not owed trillions and trillions of dollars like we do now. Balance the budget. So I got to say one last thing about Eric Prince. This is one of the most serendipitous people who ever walked the planet. If you remember, he showed up in the Seychelles Islands and just happened to run into a guy in a bar in Mahi, in the Seychelles Islands, in the Indian Ocean. And it was a big part of the conspiracy with Russia, the so-called Russian collusion. But if there was Russian collusion, as I believe there was, and if anybody was up to his eyeballs in said Russian collusion, it was amazing that Eric Prince ended up in the Seychelles Islands just talking with a guy with something about something. And I think he's the brother or brother-in-law of this Voss. And remember, Voss is this enormous Republican contributor.
That's exactly right. A brother-in-law, I believe, yeah.
So I wanted to make those remarks, but just on the legal thing, if I can just say this last thing, I think we really are holding as a nation. The courts are, I think, getting most of these things right. And I think that the U.S. Supreme Court is not going to it would so revolutionize our country, destroy the stock market. I just don't see that they have any appetite to do something. And there is a precedent. There's a case called Humphrey's Executor, which said it's okay to have these agencies, that they're not a violation of the separation of powers. They're not infringing on the prerogatives of the president. It's a 100-year-old precedent under FDR, affirming the right to have independent agencies. And it also is, besides everything else, it's totally impractical. What are you going to have? As I say, you're going to not have a Federal Reserve, not have an EPA, not have an SEC, not have a department of this and a department of that. The U.S. Supreme Court's not going to do that. And now, I mean, the public outcry has been wonderful. It really has been, Mark. You said to me the first week or two that I was an optimist. And I think my optimism has been borne out by the fact that the courts have ruled. I mean, it's 95% of the cases have gone against the Trump administration. Even on the trans issue, 2 courts voted against them because you have to handle it in a certain way. Now, looking back on it, I wish that Kamala Harris had said, you know what, allowing trans people to play in women's sports, that's too far. I don't know how much the federal government can do about it, but I don't believe in it. I wish she'd said something like that. She didn't, and they managed to pound the Democrats on an issue that, as Trump said the other day, is 90-10 against the Democrats. Whether it's right or it's wrong, all these issues that are, you can make 20 issues, Mark, and they poll the Democrats' way. And yet people are voting on an issue that involves so few people. And I don't know, the Democrats it's something about the ideology that I don't particularly share, that ideology.
Well, they're going to have to find God on the ideology, but more to the point. I mean, they can have the values of defending trans people. I think trans people deserve being
people
defended.
Who said it's the end of our democracy. If they really believe that politics is balancing, was it worth having Trump and all the things that Trump and Musk are doing right now? Was it worth RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and all these other, Kash Patel? This is a full-on disaster. Now he wants the FBI agents, Mark. You know what the problem is with the FBI agents? They don't have enough physical training. And if you met them, they're in great shape. They have to be in great shape. It's a job description. They're getting in touch with the World Wrestling or something. He's going to.
Oh my God!
There's an obligatory. That's what he's done. He's World Wrestling.
Kim, why didn't you tell me that? I didn't see that story.
Like they're all a bunch of snowflakes over there who don't have any physical training until.
Oh my God! Like that, I know.
It's a clown show. Luckily, if they stick with the clownish things, Mark, they stick with the super side issues, but they don't. They're not sticking with just super side issues.
No, they're going. There's a recriminatory, as you say, revenge tour that is well underway. So I've got to wrap.
Mark, one last thing. 30 seconds. Jack Smith did not get a pardon. He probably didn't want a pardon. And so Jack Smith wisely knows that he's being investigated. They may be sham investigations. They almost certainly will be sham investigations. But he knows that they want revenge against him. So he's got this wonderful law firm in Washington, D.C. called Covington and Burling. I was at their competitors, Arnold and Porter. Arnold and Porter was the biggest firm in D.C. that leaned left, and Covington and Burling was the biggest firm in D.C. at the time that leaned right. This law firm that leans right, that has hundreds of lawyers, that is a fantastic law firm, and that is representing Jack Smith. Trump is retaliating against them, not against Jack Smith, against the law firm of hundreds of lawyers. He's said that no one at that firm is going to get a security clearance, although some of them do work that they need a security clearance. And he wants to cancel all the contracts where Covington and Burling represents the United States, which is not only vindictive and stupid, but it's so self-destructive, as though Trump cared about the government, because if the government is getting Covington and Burling to represent them on something, they're getting absolutely high quality representation that they shouldn't give up. It's just pathetic. It's just, and of course they're making heroes out of Covington and Burling. I'm glad I'm not on the other side of a case with Covington and Burling, because now they have a halo. He just put a halo on the head of Covington and Burling, right?
That's wild. That is wild.
In charge of our country.
It is wild and it's disturbing.
Like he thinks crazy like a fox, Mark.
No, it's true. It's true, and he's and he does things out of a kind of fiat that's scary. But this is to be continued. David, thank you. You can find David Katz across, as I say, News Nation. He's oftentimes on Fox, and if you happen to find yourself in London, he's on BBC Radio, there, Radio 1.
Can I do a brief plug for News Nation? Because News Nation is really, the shows that I'm on, they're right down the middle. They always have me with a right-wing guest. I'm the left-wing guest. And and we kick it around, law and also some politics. It's usually on the weekend, Saturday or Sunday at 2 o'clock our time, Pacific Standard Time. And great to be with you, Mark. I look forward
loved
to
it.
Thursday.
Always love talking to you, David. Yeah, thank you. David Katz, everybody. Thanks, David. So long, my friend. Well, it is
The Mark Thompson Show.
it is hard to believe that we are through an entire show. And we're now running a bit behind, I guess.
Yeah.
There's no one to blame except for the new guy, Matt. So I blame him. Yes,
Poor
we've gotta
Matt.
blame Matt. Welcome to the mix, Matt. You are to blame for us running so long.
I shall take it.
That's
Wow.
the right attitude.
We never give that answer, Matt. You've got to fight
Yeah.
back.
Matt's found a different road on that answer.
Come on.
Sally and Callie with a 2025 super chat. Thank you. Yesterday and today, we can't see most of the pictures that are supposed to be shown when you are referencing stories. Your mic, though, is now loud and clear. Thank you. I don't know about the pictures that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's weird when Nathan was on talking about election irregularities and things. A lot of people in the chat were saying they couldn't see the pictures, the graphics. So I don't know what happened there because I could see them perfectly.
I will look. I mean, I sadly, I was just saying this to Anthony Davis, who has helped with a lot of technical stuff on the show. I was saying that I can't tell about whether anything is a certain way until I watch the show or listen to the show back. So in real time, I don't get a true mix of the show audio-wise in my headphones. This is probably more than people need to know, but just to give you an idea. So if fixing things in real time is hard. Go, Nathan. So appreciate your work. Thank you, CD3777. Yeah, Nathan is great. Nathan was a great guest. Somebody saying Nathan was a great guest. Mark, please bring him back sometime. Sandy, yeah, we will. Totally. I said we would, and we would. We will. We would, and we will. What else is that? Was there something else I missed? I-24 with a $9.99 super chat. Thank you. Why is this important? We are seeing irregularities that have not been compared to actual ballots. Need to verify. Otherwise, how can we say free and fair elections? Oh, they're answering the question they're asking. Why is this important? We are seeing irregularities. Exactly. That is the reason. And you can look at the statistical results of past elections to see the ways in which Americans vote. There are patterns in various counties. That's how they say this is a blue county, this is a red county. This is a county that turns out in big numbers, this is a county that doesn't turn out in big numbers. Well, we know this. So you can look at these statistical anomalies and then put them into some kind of coherent pattern. And that's exactly what Nathan did. Wizley with a $10 super chat, a super sticker, I believe that was. Thank you very much for that. As a crowd-funded show, we love all the ways you support us. We answered this question already from Dennis. Thank you so much. We answered it when we were on the air. Thank you for the $20, Dennis Fahey. That voter analysis guy was way better than Mike Lindell, says Jim Slade. Yeah. Mike Lindell is all about, I have the numbers, I'm going to bring them. I just left them in my other pants. Right? This guy actually comes with it. Welcome to the party, I guess that would be, Matt. Welcome to the party, Matt. Louis says you've been blamed, which means you're part of the family. Just don't go beyond Albert's mediocre standards. LOL. Aww. Yes, Albert has set the bar low. And I'm hoping that Matt will exceed the standards. Albert just does well enough. So there's also a lovable quality to Albert. I don't mean to say it out loud, but it's true. I kind of really am fond of my Albert. So there's that. The last two slides in his summary at the end of Nathan's explanation were black screen. Oh, that's interesting. Gosh, I don't know what that is. I will. That
everything looked good on my end too, so I'm not sure.
Mine too. We'll have to investigate.
We'll look at it. Yeah. Well, I'll look at all that stuff. But thank you for that. I mean, as I've said to you before, your feedback on technical stuff is important because we don't really sometimes even have a sense of what's going on unless you tell us. So all of that is appreciated. And I will tell you, sadly, it's a day where we have to wrap up. Didn't get any news from Kim. But I thought we got a nice deep dive into the world of the last election. Got a nice deep dive into the hacking away of government. We talked about RFK Jr. Gave you some Gene Hackman bio that I thought was worthy as well. Tomorrow I'll pick up some of the things that we didn't get to today, like a law and disorder that is really terrific. And next week we have an aviation expert coming on to talk about some of the stuff that's happening in the skies over America and beyond. And tomorrow, of course, it's Florida, it's Sure, and I have the good doctor coming through tomorrow. I think we'll shoehorn him in to talk about what's happening with the measles outbreak and with this crazy epidemic in Africa. So,
I'm Shadow Stevens for the Mark Thompson Show. Bye-bye.
Also, tomorrow is the no-buy day if you're not buying.
Out of time. Bye-bye.
Out of time. Out of money. Bye-bye.